Facebook. So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Dylan Yates and I'm the Information Communications Manager for the Nova Scotia Environmental Network. And this evening's Coffeehouse will be about environmental racism, and we are fortunate to have Dr. Ingrid Waldron as our guest speaker. So Dr. Waldron is an associate professor in the Faculty of Health at Dalhousie University and the director of the NGO Environmental Noxiousness, Racial Inequities, and Community Health Project, the ENRICH Project. She also co-produced a Netflix documentary, There's Something in the Water, and has been instrumental in bringing widespread awareness to environmental injustices suffered by racialized communities throughout Nova Scotia. So we're lucky to have two really great co-hosts this evening, Autumn Hebb and Michaela Abode, and I'll pass things off to them. And like they said, you know, just keep things respectful, and yeah, really looking forward to it.
Thanks, Dylan. I'll introduce myself first. I'll say that I'm Autumn Hebb, and I'm an NSEN volunteer recently and a fourth year Bachelor of Environmental Studies student at St. Mary's University. So happy to be here, guys, and being at this event tonight, co-hosting.
And I am Michaela Abood. I'm a first year Master's of Marine Studies student at Memorial University, and I am a brand new volunteer with NSEN, and I'm really enjoying all the opportunities I've been given so far.
All right, so we'll get right down to it. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Wek'silayowik people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not surrender of lands and resources, but in fact, the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik people established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations.
And as such, we are all treaty people. I'd like to take a moment to welcome everyone today, women, men, transgender, non-binary, and everything and anything in between, people of First Nations descent, African descent, Asian and Pacific Islander descent, Middle Eastern descent, European descent, Hispanic, and people of mixed and multiple descents. Thank you so much for the Zoom and Facebook Live members joining us on this call. And like Autumn mentioned, feel free to share anything in the chat next to us.
I am also just going to remind you guys that you'll be automatically muted during the presentation. And if you do have a question, please write it in the chat box. You can also use the raise hand button in the participants section, or you can also raise your physical hand, and we will one of the hosts will unmute you so you can ask the question. Thank you.
So the purpose of this Coffeehouse, before we get started, we just wanted to remind everyone why we're here today. For those that are new, this is a free virtual series, and it offers a chance for NSEN members and the public to chat with various guest speakers about a variety of sustainability and environmental topics and learn from their experiences and knowledge. This Coffeehouse aims to provide a basic understanding of environmental racism, especially in Nova Scotia, and for an increased action to dismantle the system in which environmental racism thrives.
Furthermore, for those of you who are new to NSEN, the Nova Scotia Environmental Network is a network of over 30 environmental organizations across the province, working to build a more sustainable future. One of the goals is to facilitate knowledge and resource sharing, and that's what this Coffeehouse is intended to do today. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Ingrid Waldron. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to take some time to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is provide a very brief overview of just the topic of environmental racism and how I've been addressing it with communities and other partners. We only have 10 minutes, so it's going to be a real snippet. I'm going to try my best to get through it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to provide a definition of environmental racism. You know, people still ask me to this day, what is it? Although I've done so many presentations over the past 8 years, and I sometimes feel that everybody knows exactly what it is, but because everyone does not, I want to provide a succinct definition by one of the community members, followed by a more academic definition. I also want to provide a few cases of environmental racism across Canada, not just Nova Scotia, but as you probably know, there are cases in Ontario, BC, etc. I also want to highlight how the ENRICH Project has been addressing the issue over the past 8 years with various partners that in many ways fill in the gaps, because I'm not an environmental scientist, I'm a sociologist, so I come at this in a different way with a different perspective. But obviously I need the expertise of geologists and other environmental scientists to do some of the work that I've been doing. So here's James Desmond. James Desmond is a longtime activist in the African Nova Scotian community of Lincolnville. And I got to know the community for the first time in October of 2013 when a few of us drove down to the community. I was starting research on the topic of environmental racism, and because the ENRICH Project is community-based, I felt I needed to get a sense from the community members what they wanted me to do, how they thought I should conduct this research project. That's essentially what community-based research is. And we were filming the workshops, and we asked James, how would you define environmental racism? And he says here, the practice has been locating industrial waste sites next to African Nova Scotian Native and poor white communities that don't have a base to fight back. And what I love about this quote is that it packs a punch. It has all of the various layers of environmental racism in that very, very simple quote. That's why I always show this definition when I do presentations. He's talking about disproportionality when he says it's typically closer to certain communities, racialized communities. When he says that they don't have a base to fight back, essentially what he's saying is they don't have political clout. These are the communities that, because they're racialized, they're low income, and they also live in isolated, out of the way places that's often invisible by policymakers and government. They often don't have a base to fight back. They're often not heard for these three reasons. Once again, race, class, education, and where they live. But there's a more academic definition of environmental racism by Dr. Robert Bullard in the United States, who is considered to be the father of environmental justice. And he talks about, just like James did, disproportionality. He says that it's about the disproportionate location and greater exposure of Indigenous and racialized communities to contamination and pollution. He says that it's about the lack of political power, as James just said. It's the fact that these communities don't have power, are often not heard by government, and then as a result, it often takes a lot of time for these communities to get heard and to have the sites cleaned up. It's about the implementation of policies. So environmental racism doesn't just happen, it happens through policies, environmental assessments. So when we see the spatial clustering of industries in certain communities, it's because it's an outcome of environmental policies and decision-making. Disproportionate negative impacts, well, it often, as I said earlier, it results in differential rates of cleanup. Why is it that certain communities get to be heard and others don't? Why is it that certain communities get to have their waste cleaned up and others don't? So it's about that as well. But it's also about the history of excluding Indigenous, racialized, and other affected communities on important decision-making bodies and boards and commissions and regulatory bodies. So when we look at our ENGOs in Nova Scotia, for example, are they really representative of the communities that are most impacted? Typically not. The people around the table aren't the people who are affected by environmental racism. Therefore, environmental racism manifests over time. It manifests intergenerationally. So a few cases. Here is Doreen Bernard. Doreen Bernard has been fighting the Alton Gas project since 2014 with her community, Sabaganagati First Nation. Engaging in a lot of civil disobedience activism, I would say, doing a really great job doing that in terms of on the ground activities, but also using their Facebook page in a very clever way to fight the Alton Gas project. We've got the contaminated Boat Harbor site in Pituating First Nation. The mill, Northern Pulp Mill, has been pumping effluent into Boat Harbor since 1967. And as you know, that the mill was closed at the end of January 2020. Here we have Sydney Tarpons. The Sydney Tarpons was often referred to as the Canada's Love Canal. and was a hazardous site on Cape Breton Island that sparked some of the first concerns about environmental injustice in Canada. So from 1901 through to 1988, the Sydney Steel Corporation's now decommissioned mill operated in the area with no pollution controls. There were extremely high rates of cancer, some of the highest in Canada. From what I looked at, from the literature I looked at, there was a kind of local cancer rate of about 45% higher than the rest of Nova Scotia. And at that time, the highest rate in Canada. I don't know what the rate is now because we know that Amjinwang First Nation has extremely high rates, and certainly Boat Harbor, Pictou Landing did as well. In May 2004, the government announced that they were going to engage in remediation, and later a park was constructed over the site. Amjinwang First Nation, over 60 petrochemical facilities surrounding the community, high rates of cancer, high rates of reproductive illness, high rates of respiratory illness. To me, one of the worst case scenarios of environmental racism in Canada. Grassy Narrows First Nation near Kenora, Ontario, has long been concerned about mercury contamination of the Wabigoon English River near their community. While the government addressed the issue a few years ago, is never truly addressed. The community is still concerned about the health effects of mercury poisoning. The community that's been in the news perhaps more than any other recently is Wet'suwet'en First Nation. So over the past 2 years, I think there's been a lot of media attention on Wet'suwet'en First Nation. So mass demonstrations, sit-ins, and blockades have gripped various parts of Canada over the movement to support this community. And they have been opposed to a multi-billion-dollar pipeline project in northern British Columbia. Africville is a historical case, but a present-day case as well, because the community is looking for reparations even now. They've risen up again recently. An historic African Nova Scotian community that was concerned about both being pushed out of their community, but also about environmental hazards that were left when the government was pushing the community out to make way for industrial development. So when that was happening, there were a lot of environmental hazards that were left, including a fertilizer plant, a slaughterhouse, a tar factory, a stone and coal crushing plant, a cotton factory, a prison, 3 systems of railway tracks, and an open dump. Lincolnville, I showed you a photo of James Desmond earlier. This is his community. They've been concerned about a first and second generation landfill since 1974 and 2006. They're concerned about the fact that the first generation landfill's contaminated water is seeping into the second generation landfill. So like the other communities, they would say that increasing rates of cancer in their community is linked to this site. You would have noticed Louise DeLille in the film, There's Something in the Water. This is her community. They say that this landfill, the Shelburne Town Dump, that's how they refer to it, was in the community since 1943 and everything went in there. It was kind of a naval base or a military base, sorry. And it was near the hospital. So syringes and items from the base and a lot of course, hazardous contaminated items were put in that dump. Extremely high rates of cancer in this community. When I met Louise at the end of 2015, she said about 95% of the people in her community has cancer. They would say it's linked to the dump. So over the past 8 years, I would say that this is not a project that I pursued. That I was in my office one day, got an email from an environmental activist, a Dalhousie graduate from the engineering department of Dalhousie, a white person, a white activist who had been actually very active around the Lincolnville issue. And he approached me, he emailed me and he said, I want to speak with you in your office about a project. He came to my office and he said, I want you to do a project on environmental racism. And I didn't know what it was. First time I heard that term, and he explained it to me. So I didn't come to this project. I didn't pursue environmental racism. It came to me. But one of the things that I've wanted to do over the years through the ENRICH Project is just to create awareness, because just like I didn't know what it was, a lot of people don't know what it is. Or at that time, a lot of people didn't know what it was. And for me, if I'm going to incite people to action around the issue, they need to have empathy around the issue. And in order to have empathy around the issue, they have to have knowledge about the issue, right? So everything is interconnected. So this is something I continue to do, hold events. This is at the Central Library about a year after the Central Library was opened. I remember looking at the Central Library and saying, oh, it's so gorgeous. I want to hold an event here. I don't care what it is, but I just want to hold an event at the Central Library. So this was my first event at the Central Library. It's still my favorite event because it was informational. It brought both communities together. It had a policy perspective, but it was also entertaining because I invited the Mi'kmaq drum group and the All Nations drummers and the African Nova Scotian drum group to also do a performance. So it was just it just lifted everybody's spirits as they're talking about something that's very daunting and very difficult to hear. It was just also celebratory in a way. So increasing awareness is something I will continue to do. As an academic, I also have to publish. One of the first things, comments made to me when I started the project, I hadn't published on environmental racism. Someone from Nova Scotia Environment said to me, well, you keep saying that this is a health issue, but where's your proof? Where's your evidence? So I said to myself, it's time for me to publish, to provide that evidence to people who doubt the reality of environmental racism, the naysayers, I guess. So I wrote this to present a few arguments in response to people who have said various things to me or critiqued what I was doing. So this book is a response to that. But this book is also to document or to show the mobilizing that has been going on for years in these communities. I have never said and will never say that I started this, right? I didn't even know what environmental racism was. I know that I'm doing this on the backs of others, right? So in this book, throughout the book, but particularly in chapter 6, I talk about over the past several decades what both communities, Indigenous, Mi'kmaq communities and African Nova Scotian communities have been mobilizing around this issue. I had a research assistant who was in health geography, and he actually created this map for the ENRICH Project. And when I think about the naysayers, after they saw this map, they were like, okay, you know, I can actually visibly see from this map that Indigenous and Black communities are close to these sites. This is kind of visible proof. And a lot of those naysayers actually started to believe when they saw this map. This map is on the ENRICH website. There are 2 layers, one for Indigenous community, Mi'kmaq communities, another for African Nova Scotian communities. And it actually has the names of the communities, and it shows you how close the dump is. And my research assistant also provided information on the connection between specific diseases, right? So the pulp mill, exposure to the pulp mill will cause these specific diseases. So it's a map that I really love. And I was recently contacted by somebody in Vancouver saying, we want to do something similar. Can you connect me with that research assistant who developed that map? So they're doing something for not Vancouver, but from British Columbia that kind of in many ways mimics this map. My goal at some point is to do a Canada-wide map. If I get the right person to do it, how can we look at and map toxic industries in these communities across Canada? I talked earlier about partnerships. I need partnerships, particularly environmental scientists who understand pollutants, because I don't, because I'm a sociologist. I understand race and I understand gender and inequality, but I don't know anything about pollutants. So I met with a geologist who was actually at one of my events, and he said, let's do a project in Lincolnville and a water testing project because we need to give the community something tangible. And I said, what would that be? He said, well, we can give them, we could do a water testing project and then provide them with a report on our findings, because you know that they're very concerned about drinking their water. So we did that. And then we said, oh, that really worked well. Let's form an NGO. That first project was in 2016, but we formed this NGO called Rural Water Watch in 2017 because we realized that the Lincolnville water testing project really worked. So we now have an NGO that only that tests water in rural Nova Scotian communities. We write a report, we give it back to the communities, we go back to the communities to conduct a workshop, we answer questions, we talk about the link between illness, disease, and water contamination. And we now started doing annual Healthy Wells Days, which started in October of this year, Sunday, October 18th. That is both an on-site awareness campaign and a social media campaign. So the on-site is collecting water samples from communities. We did that in 4 communities on October 18th of this year. But I was also responsible for doing the social media stuff because I don't know anything about water testing. So I said, I'm just going to stay home and I will post the infographics and create awareness on social media. So, you know, we're kind of ironing out the kinks you know, from that. I mean, some things worked. We had a live event that didn't happen because it wasn't working, a Facebook live event that we had technical problems. So we're kind of working out the kinks, but I think next year we know exactly what we're going to be doing. I'm working with, or have worked with Eco-Justice. That's a Canadian law charity. Some of these communities want reparations. They want a class action lawsuit. They want private prosecution. And this is what Eco-Justice deals with. So I connected with Eco-Justice in 2016, and they are currently working with the Mi'kmaq and African Nova Scotian communities to look at what legal remedies are available to them. I started working with Climate Action Services this year. They contacted me before COVID in October of last year, saying that, you know, we've done some climate change workshops in Mi'kmaq communities that work really well. We have a blueprint. We would like to do it in African Nova Scotian communities. Can you connect us? And I said, yes. I said, I can't do the workshops. I'm not a climate scientist, but if you guys want to run the workshops, I can actually connect you because I have partnerships with communities. So then COVID hit and everything stopped. And then they contacted me probably in the summer and they said, let's try to find a way to do this. And I said, okay, you guys could do it via Zoom. And we put a funding application in 3 weeks ago with African Nova Scotian Affairs. I wasn't sure we were going to get it, but I heard this week, 2 days ago, that we got the funding. So we are going to conduct the workshops. And this is great to me. This is an area I have ignored, climate change, because environmental racism is its own thing. But I realize that this is a timely, pressing issue, climate change. But I want to know, what does it mean for racialized communities? I want to use a climate justice framework to look at how it's experienced by racialized communities. So doing these workshops, while it's not research, now that we have the workshops funded, I'm going to use that as a springboard to do more work and more studies on climate change impacts in Black communities and using a climate justice framework, which a lot of people are talking about right now. I also engage a lot of students. You know, what I realized with the ENRICH Project, but I realized with the topic of environmental racism, it's so interdisciplinary. I've had students from across campus at Dalhousie, most departments that you can think of, environmental science, geography, well, there's no geography department at Dalhousie, but in another university, geography, health, sociology, the law school, medicine, environmental science, environmental studies. They have all come to me at some point saying that they want to help, they want to volunteer, they want to support. And I realize in working with students across campus that the topic of environmental racism is wonderfully interdisciplinary. And through the students, I learn. I mean, they may be learning from the ENRICH Project, but I learn from them as well. I use media, television, radio, podcast, print. I do a lot of interviews just to get the word out, but also once again to create awareness. And one of those would be the film that just came to me. You know, it's Elliott Page contacted me. No, she didn't contact me. He was promoting my book on Twitter, I guess around October 2018. And I woke up one morning and I said, wow, my Twitter is very active. What's going on? And I noticed Elliott Page saying, you got to read this book. It's wonderful. We got to support the women. So I DM'd him and I said, thank you very much for promoting my book. That's really, really kind of you. And he said, well, I just want to help in any way. I have a celebrity platform, obviously, and I want to use the celebrity that I have to help. We had conversations at the end of October 2018. We had conversations in 2019, then decided that a film would be a great idea. The film shockingly ended up at TIFF. We rushed to get it to the deadline. There we all are. And next to me is Chief Andrea Paul, Pictou First Nation, Madonna Bernard, Elliott Page, Doreen Bernard is up there, Ian Daniel, co-produced and co-directed, Michelle Paul, Elliott Page's personal assistant, Michelle Francis Denny, the editor, Louise DeLeo. Yeah, this was a real great time, but we also got the word out internationally. And then came Netflix. March of this year, we found out that, yes, indeed, it was going to be streamed on Netflix. And this has been great in terms of just getting people around the world emailing me and saying how much the women in the film had inspired them, which is actually what I wanted to achieve with this film. I wanted it to be about education. I wanted the world to know what was happening here, but I also wanted to inspire people. Lenore Zan put this bill forward 2 days ago. I don't know if you know that. So we collaborated on a bill in 2015 a provincial bill, Nova Scotia bill, that never passed into legislation. It did go to second reading. She contacted me before COVID hit and she said, I'd like to turn this into a national bill, a federal bill that I could put forward in the House of Commons. We worked on it together. She introduced it in the House of Commons this year in February. Nobody knew COVID was really coming to Canada. I think we didn't really quite know at that point. And she said, you know, why don't you come to Ottawa and we'll put it forward together. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. And then COVID hit. And then I said to her, what happens now? She said, well, contact me again in September. You know, maybe we could do it then. But right now the government's priority is COVID. I said, yes, of course. I understand that. It has to be. But I want this bill to survive. So, you know, we connected about 2 months ago and she said December 3rd is the day. And then December 3rd was last week and it was postponed until 2 days ago, Tuesday. And she put it forward and she debated it. I should mention that the debate continues. So there's no decision on the bill right now. It continues in March, and then a decision would be made as to whether or not it has been approved at the second reading. And I just recently formed a national anti-environmental racism coalition with a guy in Toronto who emailed me in the summer of this year saying, I would like to create a national kind of coalition of different members on environmental racism. Would you like to do it with me? And I said, yes, because I've actually always wanted the ENRICH Project to be more national, not just to be confined to Nova Scotia. So yes, and we did, and we have our first meeting December 16th. We've got a lot of people on board right now, and they just kind of keep coming. Like people say to me, I got a friend who I think is interested. I don't know if we can handle this, but right now, I don't know, we probably have 20 people or more who are attending the meeting. This is about easing people's burdens. We don't want to add to people's work. This is about us forming this coalition to find out how can we support you who's doing climate change stuff and environmental racism stuff. How can we support you in the work that you're doing to help you? And also, if we get funding, maybe we can give you some pots of money to do what you want to do. So this is what it's about. I mean, in certain cases, we might be developing something new, but our goal is not to add to the burdens or, you know, the responsibilities that these organizations have, because as you know, everybody's busy these days. So this is about helping them. And then finally, I recently joined a new network. I forgot the name that we chose last week, but this is about the right to a healthy environment. Canada has yet to secure a legal right to a healthy environment, while other countries around the world, not all of them, but many of them do. So I'm working with the person who used to be at the David Suzuki Foundation, the Blue Dot Foundation, to look at how we can get the attention from our government, MPs and Justin Trudeau, about the need to secure a legal right to a healthy environment. And this is about human rights. So what we're trying to embed within this is that, don't we all have a human right to clean air, clean environment, clean water? Isn't that a human right? So how do we embed kind of a rights-based approach into this work? So the kinds of things that we're going to do, we've already written an op-ed for the Tyee. I don't know if you saw that, talking about SEPA, talking about the environmental racism bill, and talking about UNDRIP. So this is about kind of action, small actions we can do, op-eds, letter writing campaigns, petitions to get the attention of government. So we're just starting, we just created a name, and they're in the process of creating a website. And we're thinking about how we start to do public facing, right? To let the community, the public know about us. That's it. I hope I was within 10 minutes. Probably not. So I'm very, like if there are any questions, very interested in hearing from you about this project or environmental racism in general.
Thank you, Ingrid. That was an amazing presentation, and you were well on time. That was fine there. Thank you. So why have these instances happened? In other words, why are environmental policies and decision-making enabling toxic industries or projects to be placed near marginalized communities? Why do these issues still continue to this day?
I would say it's rooted in how environmental policies are developed and the people who play a role in developing those policies. So one of the things I talk about in my book is that our ideologies, our perspectives, our assumptions about people, even though those assumptions might be subtle or invisible or we don't acknowledge it, they tend to be written into policies, not just environmental policies, but education policies, immigration policies. It doesn't matter what structure you're talking about, but the people who get to make decisions, those decisions are not neutral. They would say that they are, but they're not neutral. Decisions and policies are shaped by perspectives that we have about people, particularly about how we see people's worth and who is worthy of resources and who is not, who is worthy of protection and who is not. So I would say that environmental racism happens because negative, stereotypical attitudes and perspectives about Indigenous and Black communities get written into policies in very subtle ways. And sometimes the people who are making those policies don't recognize that because bias, unconscious bias, racism, we don't often detect it in ourselves, right? But a comment made by a student when I gave a talk probably 5 years ago kind of said it all to me. I was given a talk at the College of Sustainability has their Thursday night lecture series, and they invited me to give a talk. And at the end of it, a student stood up and said, okay, Dr. Waldron, so you're saying that the landfill is in Lincolnville and you'd like it to be moved. What are you saying? Are you saying it should come in my community, in our community? And I keep remembering that because it's very subtle, but what she was saying was not in our community. You know, if anything, their community, but not ours, because somehow her community is more worthy of protection. So for me, while she didn't recognize what she was saying and she just blurted it out, it's what I go to when people ask me, why does this continue to manifest? It's about who's worthy and who's not, who's worthy of protection. And if we all kind of agree that maybe we are wary about having a toxic site in our backyard because, hey, we might get cancer. I think that's what people immediately think. That's toxic, that's going to impact my health. Then certain groups would say, I don't want it in our community because we have more value than those other communities. And if we are honest as Canadians, we know very well that the ways in which we have treated particularly Indigenous people in this country demonstrates clearly, not all of us, but let's talk about the government policies, demonstrates clearly that they're not valued and they're seen as inferior. But it's very difficult for us to understand that because many of us would say that kind of blatant racism that they think I'm alluding to doesn't exist within them. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about Ku Klux Klan. I'm talking about the subtle, systemic ways in which racist ideologies get written into policies created by government and people who have decision-making power. It's extremely subtle. And those people would be nice people with Black friends and Indigenous friends. But sometimes you're not all, we call this unconscious bias. You're not often aware and conscious of the biases you have that you've grown up with. And it's impossible in white-dominated societies, in societies where there are different groups, racialized groups living together. It's impossible not to, for any of us to have biases. We all do, actually. So anybody who says that they don't, including me, is lying, right? So we need to recognize that and be honest about it and recognize that every policy, regardless of the institution we're talking about, it's embedded with bias and racism.
Very well said. That was an amazing answer and so true. I mean, we all have our own cultural biases and personal biases that we're walking around with, every day. So just being aware of that and realizing that that's embedded within policies as well as, the school curriculum is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, I know, in terms of textbook corporations, they're making sure that they are, there's an incentive to prepare history a certain type of way in order to sell their material. So it's very important to be aware of that. Yeah, thank you. I would ask the next question. Have you noticed a difference in the public's awareness of environmental racism since publishing your book and the release of the 2019 film, There's Something in the Water?
Yes, but to be honest with you, before I published my book, like a lot of people would say to me, journalists, Oh, a lot of people don't know about it. And as I said, I mean, since 2012, I've been doing so many events, organizing events. And when I started in 2012, I would have journalists say, what is it? I'm talking about Nova Scotian journalists, because I think we're doing much better than the rest of Canada, because I went during the Toronto International Film Festival, I was speaking with media, Canadian media, and they had never heard of it. So of course in Nova Scotia, we're doing better because I'm the person kind of doing that work. I don't know anybody in Ontario doing environmental racism work, to be honest. So when people say to me, oh, I don't think people know about it, or do you get a sense that nobody knows about this? And I'm like, oh God, do I have to do more presentations? I definitely think it's not even about the book and the movie. Yes, of course, the movie went worldwide, and yes, there's more, but I noticed it from 2012 to 2017 that I was no longer being asked by journalists and other people in Nova Scotia what it was. There was just this kind of, environmental racism, right? I know what that is. That's the ENRICH Project. So I think the book has certainly created a lot of awareness in academia and the members of the public who have read it. Netflix is global, so of course, I've heard from people around the world, but I noticed a change in Nova Scotia 2014, 2015, where I was no longer being asked about this topic. People knew what it was.
Thank you. How does it make you feel to be taking on the lead for such an important issue, and what keeps you motivated to do this kind of work?
I will say to you that it's extremely tiring. I've been doing it for 8 years, and when, for example, a bill doesn't pass, I'm like, what am I doing this for? Not that it's all about a bill, but I get tired because it's been 8 years, and I think anybody who's in the environmental sector, like you guys, whether you're doing climate change or just anything having to do with the environment, have you noticed how long things take to change? It's a really difficult issue because it's about profit. So I'm sure all of you would say that, like, oh, wow, it's taking so long to get people on board with respect to climate change. Nothing's happening. We do sit-ins in government offices, and it gets the media attention, but then nothing happens after that. And this is like a really frustrating topic, the environment in general. So I do get tired, but people have asked me, so what keeps you going? And you know what keeps me going? When I meet new people in my office, which always happens. They take me down a different path. If I had said no to Dave Ron, the white activist who told me what this topic was all about, if I had said no to him, I'm busy, I wouldn't have taken this thrilling project on. If I said no to the geologist who said we need something tangible, I would not have had Rural Water Watch. If I can go on and on. So the reason I stay motivated and passionate is because I'm open to meeting people, even though I'm tired and I want to say no, I say, yes, you can certainly meet with me tomorrow in my office. And ultimately, I'm doing a different project, a water testing project, or a film, or there are times when the ENRICH Project slows down and I'm kind of like, okay, what now? And then in a month's time, I meet somebody new and they say, hey, what about this project? So my passion continues because I see this as an expansive issue. I've had partners who challenged me. I have partners who bring new ideas, fresh ideas to me. And I like a challenge, so I go with it. So that keeps me motivated. Also, the young people, like yourselves, are so passionate about, mostly climate change, I would say. Really passionate about climate change in this province, but so passionate about the environment that, I'm in a bubble, but I meet young people like yourselves who are so bright and who have the language and who are running their own NGOs. And I put so much hope in them because I look at the government people right now in power and I'm like, they don't get it. They don't get it. They don't understand environmental racism. They don't understand what they're doing with their policies. And I'm hoping that this new generation like yourselves are getting it in a different way because you're going to be holding positions of power in government. And I'm not saying that you should do what I want you to do, but I would like you to make considered decisions. I don't think decisions are considered decisions. So I'm not saying that you should just do what Ingrid says, but I want you, before you act, to think and consider some of the things that I talk about in my book and then act. That keeps me motivated, young people like yourselves. I'm not saying that to butter you up, but it truly, I'm amazed because when I was 23, I wasn't running an organization or an NGO, right? But many of the young people in your age group are running initiatives, and I find that amazing.
Thank you, Ingrid.
This question is coming in off Facebook from Jasmine. She asked, do you have advice for the youth that are working in these spaces and tackling these issues? For example, I work in ocean conservation and I'm from a small town in Alberta, and I find that there's always a lot of pushback from my community.
I'd be interested in knowing what type of pushback and why. But typically when people ask me to give advice to young people, I always say the first thing that you do is you read about the topic and make sure you're educated about the topic. But the second thing is, for me, is always developing relationships first with the communities. Identifying the communities in your neighborhood, in your community, in your province that are being affected by the issue that you're interested in. Ocean conservation, environmental racism, climate change. Who are the communities that are being directly impacted? Identify them. Start developing relationships. Through social media is a good way these days. But being seen, being on site, being there, being present, getting to be known, being a familiar face. Then people start to trust you. And then you do the work in partnership with others. So I don't know when she talks about her community or there's pushback, and if it's from the Indigenous or Black community or the affected community, but I highly doubt that there would be pushback from affected communities. So for me, maybe she's focusing on the wrong community. Focus on the communities who actually want the support. Develop those relationships. As I said, be there, right? Sometimes it's just about being there because you want them to know you and to trust you and to feel comfortable with you. The work that you do will always be organic and authentic if the work you're doing is in partnership with the people who are most impacted. Get on Facebook pages, subscribe to their Facebook pages. They will tell you at any given time what they need that day. I think of Doreen Bernard in Indian Brook, you know, and when they were building the Treaty Truck House, they would put out calls saying, does anybody have any nails? You know, we need nails today. Can anybody come up today and help us to do this? We need blankets, right? Because Dale Poulette, who was kind of holding stake at the Treaty Truck House, he was doing that during the winter time. So he needed blankets to keep himself warm. So I think nowadays, because social media is everything, I would say get onto the Facebook pages of the communities most impacted, identify ways to support them. Sometimes it's as simple as sending out a petition, a GoFundMe page, retweeting is all they want, right? So I'm not in the area of conservation, but I would say the same thing, that I don't know who she's getting pushback from, but identify the communities that need what she's offering. Who needs what she's offering, her services? Who needs it? Focus on them. Don't focus on the people who are negative.
Thank you for the incredible advice, and I'm sure Jasmine really appreciates it. The next question is from Andrea. She's wondering, has the municipalities come on board and have been supportive of your work?
It's, I focused on MPs. I focused on, I mean, with the campaigns that, well, let me think back. I wouldn't say it's necessarily municipalities. I've reached out to specific people for support. So at the end of 2014, I had meetings several times with Nova Scotia Environment, the policy department. At that time, it was Randy Delory. I believe he was the Minister of Environment, or maybe not, so I met with him. And in my campaigns around the legislation, I have focused on MLAs who have been supportive and MPs for this particular bill. In terms of the MLAs, I created a little project for myself at the end of 2014. I said, I'm going to identify the MLAs that are responsible for the communities that I'm working with. I'm going to phone them. I'm going to follow up with an email, and I'm going to wait to hear from them. And this was just before Christmas. It was actually around Christmas time. And I had return calls from several MLAs, some of whom were NDPs, some were conservatives, wanting to help. The first person was Lenore Zan, who I developed the bill with. And there was another man from the NDP who sadly, I've heard from Lenore recently, passed away. He had cancer at that time, but he was extremely passionate in helping me. And he said he's from Sydney. And yeah, he wanted to help, but he's passed away. So I would say it's been sporadic. I would say that for me, the person who has supported me over these past 5 years is Lenore. And I will continue to support her because she supported this particular issue. Right now it's the MPs. Let's see whether or not they're supportive. I don't know. I'm involved in a campaign for this bill. I've reached out to many of them. I'm hoping to get support from the Black. I didn't realize there's a Black parliamentary caucus at the House of Commons who are concerned about collection of race-based data and systemic racism. So what I'm going to do is reach out to them and say, well, you know what? Environmental racism is an example of systemic racism. You also have a focus on collection of race-based data. Well, this new bill that we developed is talking about the collection of race-based data. Do you want to work with us? Do you want to help us? So I'm in the process of actually identifying people. I also have this other woman who has been helping me kind of in the background. She's working for a senator by the name of Senator Galvez, who I've never met, who I haven't contacted yet, but her assistant or administrative assistant has been very kind over the past 2 weeks saying, we really want to support this bill. Mr. Galvez is really interested and we need to figure this out. And she emailed me and she said, I want to set up a meeting with you. I said, can we please include Lenore Sand because she's the one who developed this bill. So she's planning stuff. There are people in the background who have said to me, I want to see this passed. What can we do? So we will see. This is new to me, you know, campaigns and reaching out to politicians. It's not something that's easy for me. It doesn't come naturally to me. So I speak to people. I get advice from people like folks at the David Suzuki Foundation who do this work all the time, this campaign stuff and reaching out to politicians. It's just not natural for me. So I'm listening to advice in terms of how I should support myself, this bill, and make sure that it survives. So I cannot say that people have not supported me. Perhaps I need to do a better job in terms of how I reach out to politicians, and I keep learning. So.
Great, thank you so much.
I'm going to ask the next question, if that's okay. What can we do to help as students and everyday citizens? Michelle Paul and other grassroots grandmothers have continuously expressed that there is power in unity, that people need to come together as a collective to achieve liberation and enact positive change. So how do we begin to achieve this unity?
That we come together in unison and we never stop. I think, as I said before, we get tired and frustrated, those of us who are working in this area. And what I've seen in Nova, and I would point to myself as well, I'm not blaming anybody because we're all tired, but what I've seen is, particularly around folks who are doing climate change stuff, they will do kind of action, like, you know, showing up at a government's office, et cetera, and kind of making it known. And then that stops, and then there's no follow-up. It doesn't persist, it drops until the next time they do that again, and then it stops. And I understand why, because, you know, it's difficult for me as well, but we need to keep it up and it needs to be amped up. We need to persist. And we have these actions that we do, and then there's no follow-up. So I would say that our voices need to be heard in unison. We have to find a way to have some project or activity where it continues, that we have action, but it's followed by something else and then something else again, all of us, and that it's coordinated amongst all the people in the climate sector or in the environmental justice sector, that we are all working together, because there's so many initiatives in Nova Scotia, a climate change initiative, different organizations. To what extent are they all coming together to work together to say, here's a plan from January to July, and we're going to do this from January to July on these specific dates, and we're going to keep it up. And you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And this is what I'm hoping to do with this new National Anti-Environmental Racism Coalition. I talked about that. You know, if we can have coordinated efforts around, first of all, the bill, because that's one project we can engage in that's tangible. And everyone has a role, and we keep it up, and it's followed by something else, and we don't drop it. Then to me, that is the way to make change. So it's a difficult one, but I would like to see, let's just talk about climate change. I would like to see all the climate change organizations come together to engage in a coordinated approach for, let's say, 7 months, where they're doing different things to get the attention of government, but they're also talking to the media, and they're doing, you see all the things that I mentioned that I do? Like, it seems very disparate, but you need to do all of those things. Speak to the media, work on legislation, do civil disobedience, work with communities. Like, it's actually a template for what can be done, but it has to persist, and different people have to be committed to doing it. And what often happens is people get burned out, you know, because I met some of those people and I said, do you want to do this? And it's like, Ingrid, I'm taking a break right now. I'm no longer part of that organization. And I'm looking at the organization, I'm thinking, that's such a great organization. You were so great. Oh no, I left 2 months ago. So that happens a lot because people are tired. So that's, I don't know if that's good advice, but that's what I'm seeing.
No, that's amazing advice. And I mean, it's definitely not easy. And I mean, getting burnt out is completely, you know, human, and it's understandable, but it's nice to see that, you know, having a plan and, you know, doing it over 7 months or a little bit longer, and enacting that is important as well, right? To keep on being a pest and to keep on, you know, working from all sectors. It's very important.
Mm-hmm.
So since it is 7:55, I will cut the call off early because Dr. Ingrid does have another meeting. So I just want to thank everyone who attended this coffee house on Zoom and Facebook Live. We hope that you are able to gain a basic understanding of environmental racism in the province and what's going on and the work that Dr. Waldron is doing. So thank you, Dr. Waldron, for educating us on your work and inspiring us to take action against environmental and health inequalities and racism.
I just want to say one thing, and maybe I'll send it to Dylan. I have a campaign page on my ENRICH website for the bill. I've crafted a letter, I've crafted tweets. I have the email addresses for MPs, Justin Trudeau, the climate change minister, etc. So I could either send it to Dylan, or you can just go over to my Facebook page, and, you know, if you can tweet out and send letters en masse, that would be helpful. Excellent.
Yeah, we'll
Thank
do
you
that.
for acknowledging that. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Michaela.
So yeah, this coffee house was recorded. If you want to share it with your friends, someone that may not have been able to attend, and just get the word out and bring awareness to all the incredible work that Dr. Waldron's doing. This will be recorded and posted on our Facebook page. And while you're there, give us a like, and obviously go to Dr. Waldron's page and look at her resources and facilitate this action plan.
We also do have a feedback poll as well too. So if you can just tell us what you you know, enjoyed learning from the event, what you want to see in the future, and any other comments or suggestions, we'd love to add you to our contact list so you can be notified for future events. Also, if you're going to get the newsletter, you can also gain some information in terms of resources from Ingrid today as well too. So thanks so much, guys. Thank you so much, Dr. Ingrid. We appreciate all that you've done and chiming in here again today.
Thanks for inviting me. Bye.